So, one of the biggest responsibilities of a leader in the workplace is communication, especially when the message you're sharing is about change. So, what you say, how you say it, when you communicate, and who you communicate with can all impact your message. Your communication influences whether or not people at your organization buy into your ideas, your plans, your goals, and your vision. So, with us today for our first masterclass is Andrea Belk Olson. She's a behavioral scientist and strategy consultant who has written for HBR about many topics, including how to get employee buy in. She's also the CEO of Pragmatic, an agency that helps corporations operationalize their strategies. And she's the author of several books, including What to Ask, How to Learn What Your Customers Need But Don't Tell You. So I'll pop in at the end of the masterclass to ask any questions that you have for Andrea. Put them in the Ask the Speaker Q&A box. I'll get to as many as I can. And Andrea, what should we do or what should leaders say to get employee buy-in for organizational change? Take it away.
Oh, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm really, really happy to be here discussing this obviously incredibly important topic. And I know it's something that we've all been challenged with at one time or another in our organizations and oftentimes our careers. And I think we really need to explore some new ways to address this challenge of getting buy in for change that's not only genuine, but sustainable. So that's what we'll be discussing today. So let's dive right in. So think about a change your organization has attempted to implement. And here's how the process often goes. A new change is introduced, and usually there's a little initial excitement and fanfare. And then over time, that starts to lose a little momentum. And maybe after even more time, the organization starts to disengage a bit. Then, at some point in the cycle, change begins to stall or completely stalls. And leadership sees the problem, wants to get things reactivated. So they find a new focus. And then the cycle starts all over again. And this pattern is commonly called flavor of the month syndrome. It's those short lived management or organizational strategies that are enthusiastically introduced, but often quickly abandoned. And really, the question is, why does this cycle occur? Why is it really change resistance that's at play, or is it something else? And I believe that organizations think they're effectively communicating and equipping employees for change when they're actually not. So let's take a look at an example. This is a corporate goal from a $35 billion company. Synergize our teams across departments to create a stronger value proposition for our customers. Now, the question is, what does this mean? It could actually mean anything. This could be interpreted a thousand different ways. It really says nothing about what the organization should be doing different, let alone how. And employees have no idea where to start. So it's really no wonder that a change like this stalls out and then a new initiative just simply takes its place. And, this behavior doesn't really just impact individual teams or individual employees, but it impacts the entire organizational culture. So when the cycle occurs again and again and again, employee behaviors really start to shift. Subsequent changes are going to face an even stronger resistance as people start clinging to the status quo for comfort. It's also not a behavior that's isolated to a specific company or industry. And actually, according to Harvard Business Review, 42% of employees never or almost never challenge the status quo. And this change resistance, it impacts organizational competitiveness. In fact, only 6% of executives are satisfied with their company's ability to innovate. So, what do we do? How do we overcome this? Well, we try to fix the problem with the same old best practices. We focus on communicating the need for change. We talk about collaboration. We maybe emphasize continuous improvement, or we try to put more structure around the change. We talk about being transparent. But many of us have tried all of these things. And it seems like no matter how hard we try, it just never quite gets the job done. And this is because in every stage of communication, there are leak points. These points are where misunderstanding and confusion happens. And this is where what you perceive doesn't connect with what the recipient perceives. And these are the true gaps we need to address. So, this requires a brand new mental model, a different approach for communicating change. And that model has two specific parts. One is translating, which is clarifying abstract language about the change. And two is reframing, shifting how employees perceive the change. So let's first talk about translating. So while abstract language can leave a lot of room for creativity, it actually more often creates confusion and even worse, inaction. Because people really need clarity. They need an understanding of what's really trying to be achieved and more importantly, what's expected of them. So, for example, here's a statement pulled from one of our clients' corporate strategies. The statement says, share a fundamental commitment to success through collaboration. Now, this statement was intended to help direct the company's focus on teamwork and specifically help avoid budget and deadline overruns. But the problem is, this statement says nothing about that. What should employees be doing differently? And what actually really needs to change? Employees are already collaborating in one way or another. So the question is, what is the new expectation? So to fix this problem, translating that abstract concept into something clear requires defining two things. First, what actions and behaviors we want to see. And second, what outcomes and benefits we want to achieve. And this was the result. Actively involve all stakeholders and understand how they contribute to avoid delays and cost overruns. Now, this seems very simple, but this translation provides three distinct and important advantages. Number one, it provides clarity on what actions employees should take, specifically here involving stakeholders and understanding how they contribute. Number two, it explains the bigger purpose for those actions, specifically avoiding delays and cost overruns. But most importantly, number three, it is measurable and is measurable in two ways. First, with hard metrics. And in this case, the number of deadlines hit versus missed. And then second, with soft metrics. And in this case, the amount and quality of meeting participation and how well everyone understands each other's responsibilities. So let's dive into the second part, reframing. Now, reframing is really about giving employees the power to shape change and specifically enabling them to interpret it based on their business context. So let's go back to another example. This is one of our clients that crafted a strategic objective to elevate their organization's focus on safety. They stated, integrate safety into every decision and action we take, doing the right thing even when it's not easy. Now, this maybe seems aspirational and fantastic and clear, but the question is, how can everyone in the organization contribute? I mean, certain departments might feel safety doesn't apply to me, or that's another department's job. And while this might seem like change resistance, it's actually a perception gap that's the real problem. People need a structured way to explore how the change applies to their area of responsibility. So, in this situation, it meant having each department examine their own definition of safety, along with exploring how they can contribute in a way that's relevant to them. And this meant answering four questions. First is, what does safety mean for us? Two was, in what ways could they integrate safety into their department objectives? Third was, how could they integrate safety? Excuse me. How could we integrate safety into them? And four is, how can we improve what we're already doing? So this let employees reframe the change around what they could influence and control. It makes the change more relevant and provides them in a hand with shaping what it looks like. So, in our example, here's how each department defined what safety meant for them. So, obviously, operations focused on job site safety. That was their most important definition of safety. But other departments had different perspectives. Project management focused on environmental safety. Information technology focused on safety of company data and information. Finance focused on regulatory compliance and the overall financial health and safety of the company. Customer service focused on the safety of customer data, making sure processes were in place to secure that information. And marketing focused on staff education about all different aspects of safety. And if you'd really like to explore how departments further translate this into action, you can take a look at my HBR article on crafting department strategies. The URL is here. And of course, it's also on the HBR website. So, in closing, I'd like to share 5 additional tips you can use to really foster change acceptance within your company, no matter the scope of that change. First is legitimacy. So it is important to involve people who don't have a formal leadership title in a change, but are highly respected in the organization. Those people are those natural individuals that others follow, and they respect their perspective and insights. Getting those people involved early is critical to getting lasting change. Two is relevance. So tie that new change to some existing need or problem within the organization rather than simply piling on another effort, because that relevance will show you are aware and recognizing the other problems that exist, which need to be addressed. Three is attainability. So break that change into a series of smaller micro changes. Make it more digestible, make it something that's achievable. Number four is authenticity. So represent through your actions what the change embodies rather than simply glossing it over with superficial fodder or platitudes like logos or t shirts or pizza parties. And then five, impartiality. So, if needed, it's important to bring in an outside party as a change facilitator. And this can eliminate the perception of favoritism as well as maybe any internal politics at work. So, if you're willing to apply a new mental model, you can really create a clear path to sustainable change because genuine, lasting buy-in really comes from clarity and not coercion, and of course, ownership, not obligation. Thank you. And I'd love to open it up for questions.
Okay, Andrew, that was fantastic. That's a great framework, and I'm sure people were taking copious notes. I do have some questions that have come in from the audience, and this is from Katie. Not sure where Katie's from, but Katie's question is: what strategies have you found most effective for improving communication and collaboration in a kind of online or hybrid or work from home team where you have different time zones, different communication styles, different engagement levels?
I've worked in a similar situation where I've had teams that were remote, teams that were working in other countries, and it is definitely a challenge. But I believe there's two parts to that challenge. One is logistics. I think you need to have a consideration for other people's circumstances and timing of when you have meetings, what their availability is. But it all goes back to communication. So it goes back to consistency. It's all about adapting to other people's communication styles, addressing those leak points, and making sure that what you're communicating is completely understood and reflected back so everyone's on the same page.
So here's a question from Uche about transparency, and the question is, what role does transparency play in gaining employee buy-in, and how much information should leaders share? Can leaders share? It's not going to be 100%. So how do you
Mhm.
think about that equation?
Well, I think transparency equals trust. And of course, there's always cases where certain information can't be divulged. But it's important to share as much information as you can. And more importantly, information that's relevant to that person's department or role. So the more you can give them ammo to take action and take control of that change and make it their own, the more successful you'll be.
So here's a question that is very much in the same vein from Maili. So when businesses have to make tough changes for the long term that will negatively impact some people, how do they communicate that? Is close to full transparency better despite the risk of a backlash, or should they control the narrative to sort of reduce, conflict and concern? How do you balance honesty with stability?
Well, I think that transparency really starts with explaining the why. You have to explain that this wasn't a change or decision made off the cuff. There's, I'm sure, a lot of background to why that decision had to be made. So, communicating key elements of that is going to help us still retain that trust, because the problem is when you start looking like you're couching, it looks like you're hiding things, other people hear things from other departments. Now that groundswell of doubt starts to feed the organization's culture. So I would say err on the side of honesty and transparency, but be clear. If there's something you can't communicate or divulge, be upfront with that and say that you can't.
Yeah. So Laura asked, do you have thoughts on kind of the standard change management methodologies, ADKAR, CMMI, maybe others? Do you have views on any of these?
Operationally speaking, you have to have structure around change. People need to know there's a lot of moving parts. And so they need to understand where they are in that process. But when you're looking at change communication, getting that genuine buy in up front requires that ability to say, here's what you can do to embrace that. Here's how you can drive that for your own area, and have clarity on what the expectations are. So, to me, the standard models really are about the process, and the new mental model is really about genuine buy in.
So here's a question from Maxime, who says that unhealthy organizations aim only for outcome. Healthy organizations aim for helping people make better decisions. So how does your framework try to foster the healthy and discourage the unhealthy, if you accept that sort of framework?
Sure. So I think the framework really focuses on that empowerment. So when there's clarity on what the objective is, and an individual department can say, what does this mean for us? The difference is that they can take that idea and ideally run with it, but it still ties back to that bigger strategic objective or goal. So the intent is that everyone's still aligned, yet they are doing their own individual flavor of that specific corporate goal.
All right, I think we're almost out of time, but just a quick question. I mean, I think our audience is really interested in this and probably has an appetite for more. So this is
Obviously.
an anonymous question. Do
Okay.
you have a book recommendation on this topic for kind of further reading beyond the article that you sent us a link for?
In I would don't want to look self-centered, but I am actually writing a book on this topic. It's titled "Flavor of the Month." There's a lot of stories, a lot of examples, and much more on this framework on how you can convert this starting point into action in individual departments. So that should be coming out towards the end of the year.
Okay. All right. Well, that was such a quick answer. I have time for one more. This is from Nandu. So it's a question: who should lead conveying messages across a company? And the question is: should it be someone who understands each group but is not a member, or should someone from each group step forward to convey the messaging?
Great question, and I think that goes back to my 5 points, and specifically the first one on legitimacy. Who is the leader that people respect, whether that's in their title or not? And if they are in a department or tangential to that department, I don't think that really has an impact. Every organization's different, every culture's different. So you need to start with those natural leaders that people look up to and naturally follow and admire.
Andrew, we are now really out of time, but I want to thank you. That was a great presentation. I think you've given us a lot to think about. So thank you for being part of the HBR boot camp.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break, but before that, I want to share with you a little bit information about an exclusive subscriber benefit. So each week, as many of you know, we send subscribers a weekly newsletter called The Insider. It's written by my colleague, Maureen Hoke, who's the editor of HBR.org, and it's full of her personal recommendations for HBR articles that you do not want to miss. And again, it's just for subscribers. So here's Maureen to tell you more about The Insider, and I will see you again right after the break.